What's going on? I want to give you the advice I wish I heard. In 12 minutes, I'm going to distill down 12 years of brutal fitness advice from being a fitness coach for the last decade plus. Now, I was 270-ish pounds back in my 20s. So 20 plus years ago, I lost 60 pounds, 60, 70 pounds. I did everything wrong though. And what this video is going to try to help you with is to avoid all of my mistakes, the trial and error, the frustrations, the headaches along the way if fat loss is your goal. So first off, we've got to know the best diet has a couple fundamental principles, right? It accounts for calories, it accounts for protein, and it accounts for fiber. When you get your numbers right in those three areas, I don't really care what you eat on an individual basis, like food choices, because by default, you'll be in an optimal environment. So you can get the calculator I have in the description below, but before you jump off, just take your current body weight, multiply it by 12. That'll give you a starting point of calories to roughly determine if that's going to lead to fat loss. That might be maintenance for some people. Really depends on your activity levels, age, your overall weight, height, etc. But that'll give you a starting point for calorie intake if weight loss is your focus. And then protein is take your current body weight, multiply it by 1, and aim to get close to that target in total grams of protein per day. The general standard for fiber is 25 to 35 grams per day. All right, you get those three variables right, you are in good position. Okay. Next up, though, there's a lot more pieces to the puzzle than just your nutrition intake. That certainly drives the bus, but in the passenger seat is your strength training, and that's one of our big 5 habits in Calvert coaching. Is you want to preserve muscle. Oftentimes people can crash diet. They see the scale go down consistently, they're pumped, but as much as half the weight you lose could be bone and muscle, which clearly are 2 things you want to preserve to not only look your best, but feel your best, perform your best when all is said and done. So you have to strength train in some capacity. For some, that's enough to be 2 times a week to maintain, 3 times a week for 30 minutes. If you're advanced, obviously we go a bit beyond that, but that gives you at least an achievable target. All right. Beyond your calories and nutrition and your strength training, next up is the real basic, obvious stuff that might not get overlooked, but still needs to be emphasized, right? Your steps, your daily movement, NEAT, they call it, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. That can account for 300 to 500 plus calories difference. If you've got the roofer burning X amount of calories and the desk jockey that just sits at his desk, most of us are desk jockeys nowadays by default. So you have to kind of bridge that gap. So how do you do it? Like 10-minute mini walks after meals, getting your steps up, playing a rec sport. It does play a role. It's not the primary driver of fat loss, but it makes it a lot easier. Okay. Next up is sleep. You breathe out body fat while you sleep. It gets converted to carbon dioxide, right? But where I feel it serves its best role is just, how you feel when you wake up, when you're poorly rested. You don't have the motivation to track your food. You don't have the motivation to get a workout in. You move less. You have more cravings. And it's the cascade effect. So prioritizing 7+ hours of sleep a night, super important to this process, okay? And the last one of our 5 habits is just your water intake. The 3L club. Without hydration, it's hard to change your situation. It does take the edge off your appetite, but performance improves, your brain functions better. It's a long laundry list of benefits. It just has to be one of those fundamental things you prioritize. All right. Next up, when it comes to fat loss and staying in it, is to account for hunger. There are going to be some dull hunger, even if you're doing everything right at times, but you want to mitigate that. So there's a lot of ways to do this. Certainly you want to fill up on protein and produce, like the more voluminous foods that don't pack a lot of calorie punch. You want to, again, like we talked about, prioritize sleep so that your cravings are diminished or lower. And you want to do it in a way that you're not too aggressive with your diet or over exercising, because either of those is going to fire up those hunger signaling to your brain, from your brain, and get you to overeat, or at least eat the difference between how much more exercise you're doing versus not. Okay, so the real is a sweet spot. You want to coax fat loss. You don't want to force it. So that means strength training enough times a week, getting your steps in, and maybe doing a little bit of higher intensity cardio, but not too much. Because, well, for one thing, your body adapts to it fairly quickly. What you burn the first time you did it probably burning half that a month later, and the appetite increase and the down regulation in your knee. So your body will subconsciously try to make up the difference in all those calories burned from the exercise by having you move less. And the net gain or loss in this case is not as much as you think. Now, there are appetite suppressants. Nowadays, it's fairly new, but the Ozempics and GLP-1s of the world, I caveat this. You're having to take an injection. It costs a lot of money, and it only works while you're on, okay? And in research, they've shown as much as 40% of the weight loss on these drugs is the wrong kind of weight loss. The Ozempics often lead to loss of bone, could be early onset osteoporosis. We've seen a lot of research and people bearing it out on social media, and muscle mass, right? I don't think it's the drug just attacking muscle and bone, but it puts you in an environment where you're feeling very full, so you don't really consume protein to the quantities you need. That's going to help with preserving muscle. It diminishes performance, so you're less likely to work out because you feel like bloated and full, and your exercise performance and quality and frequency, frankly, may diminish, which obviously means less muscle preservation again. So from a health perspective, yeah, if extreme obesity, you've tried it all, you may want to explore your options there, but I call it a last resort for the average person that's looking to lose 20, 30 pounds that hasn't really dialed in all their lifestyle yet. Okay. Next up on this list is hormones. So I was always low testosterone, but that was largely a byproduct of carrying around 60 extra pounds. Losing the weight got my hormones to a pretty okay spot. Now, some will explore testosterone replacement therapy or hormone replacement therapy, especially for women in menopause. It might be something you have to address through pharmacology if you find that, the night sweats, the sleep disruptions, just too extreme to manage, right? So that's not my area of expertise. I'm not a proponent of testosterone replacement therapy for men if you can get your levels to a good spot naturally, because you're playing God and it's a lot of trial and error, and sometimes it puts people in a worse off position. Okay. So what I recommend is dialing in your lifestyle, the big 5 habits we talked about, getting leaner. That is probably the most important pieces. There are over-the-counter supplements, vitamin D, getting some sun exposure, boron. I have seen in my blood work, showed quite an improvement in free testosterone. So worthwhile to maybe explore those avenues if you still feel you're diminished or your blood work is showing you're a little less than optimal. All right. Next up, I'm not sure what we're doing for time, but track your data. It's not just scale weight. Yes, average it out, weigh in maybe 3 times a week. Measurements are good. How your clothes are fitting, I like photos best. Now you can go the advanced route to like the full in-body or DEXA scans. Margin for error though is not perfect. Even with the DEXA, it can be off by 5-10% with your body fat percentage. So I don't like to rely solely on those. You know yourself best. If you're tracking measurements consistently and photos and your strength in the gym, how your clothes are fitting, all these signs are going to point you in the right direction. So look to those first and foremost. The day-to-day stuff you can track fairly easily. Last but not least, I know for me, I didn't make this work until I got accountability. Before it was cool, I got an online coach named Ken Hill. Before that, I was jumping around from fad diet to quick fix. I did keto before it was cool. Ended up in the ER with a bowel obstruction. Wouldn't recommend. And a lot of different paths, but I never really stuck to anything that led to like permanent change until I had someone in my corner